the members of the Supreme Court of the United States. We have the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Right. We have the President's Cabinet. So there is a certain significance.
-1.
I take it. Exactly, the designated survivor, exactly, whoever that is, made famous by TV. But it does raise an important issue about our government, that we all do come together, whatever our partisan divides, whatever branch of government, we do come together at this once a year to all be in the same room and talk about what we're doing as a country.
Yeah, and this is something I think that the American public really is galvanized by. This is what's supposed to happen in our country, is all the important people that you read about and hear on the news all the time are in one place, the Hall of the People, Congress, and they are hearing from the President of the United States, one of the most important things the President does. I would say it is a very big unifying aspect to it. And one of the things that's also unifying on the floor today is you'll see in the coverage a number of people wearing the blue and yellow ribbons of Ukraine. And so that's another unifying topic. Now, national security doesn't usually get a lot of talk, but I would expect Ukraine to be one of those things that he can unite Republicans and Democrats with.
I'm sorry, we're now ushering in the diplomatic corps, which is part of the ritual as well. I excluded them, actually. The diplomatic corps attends this as well. But I'm so glad you raised Ukraine, Rick, because we have to remember last year, when the State of the Union was it was just after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This year, it's right after the spy balloon from China. So geopolitics really insert themselves. Jeannie, I wonder how much we made of that, because there are a lot of people, I think, on the right and the left, who give President Biden some credit for unifying NATO and our allies and really coming to Zelensky's defense.
Yeah, and that has been one of the biggest accomplishments of his administration, and is something we're going to hear about tonight. But of course, as it pertains to Ukraine, we are in a different place. You are hearing Republicans in Congress talk about the amount of spending that has been, that the United States has given in terms of the war. They want to talk about that more. They're not sure. They want to keep up that level of spending. But you're right. This is enormously important to Joe Biden and the American public. We're going to hear more about that tonight. And of course, China, which the administration has long said is the most important geopolitical issue we face. And the president's going to talk about that tonight as well.
Our White House and politics editor, Mario Parker, has rejoined us now. Mario, Jeannie said the magic word spending, which seems to be around Washington these days. And we have Kevin McCarthy and Republicans saying, you're spending too much. We're not going to raise the debt ceiling unless you take care of that. Is there serious interest at the White House in actually addressing spending as opposed to taxing?
Well, no. Right? That's the short answer. The White House has dug its feet in the sand, right? It doesn't want. It said that it doesn't want any preconditions on raising the debt ceiling. No cuts to entitlements, not any of those things that are items that could doom them, particularly 2 years from or a year from now, with a presidential campaign.
Interesting. We're waiting for the next delegation to come in now.
Chief Justice and Associate Justices of the Supreme Court.
Okay, the Supreme Court is coming in now, led by Chief Justice John Roberts. I have a soft spot in my heart, as you know, for this, because I got to work up there for 1 year. It's a special institution there, so they're coming as well, which is an important moment. As you know, Rick, we had one moment under President Obama that was not so pleasant, actually, with Justice Alito, when President Obama took on a decision, Citizens United, as I recall, in front of them, and Justice Alito was seen to be mouthing pretty directly, that's wrong.
Yeah, when you take on Supreme Court justices who aren't controlled by the vagaries of elections, during a State of the Union, you really got to know that you're causing some trouble. And of course, as you point out, David, Justice Alito didn't really particularly cotton to that. And thank goodness we didn't have any, interpreters reading his lips that night.
That's exactly right. And I must say, it won't come as a surprise to you. In my experience, Supreme Court justices are not used to having people disagree with them.
No, not in public.
They're being told, yes, sir, basically.
I would point out one thing. Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin are sitting over on the Republican side tonight. Our new independent senator from Arizona is sitting with Mitt Romney and Todd Young. So a couple of her buddies who she's done quite a bit of legislation with, and that may be sort of sending a shiver up the majority leader's spine in the Senate, because that probably is an indication of things to come this cycle.
Well, I wonder about that, Gene. That's an interesting suggestion, particularly as I come back to the debt ceiling, because that's so much on people's minds as we come up to probably a deadline sometime this summer. Could you really do damage to American financial institutions, to the economy overall? But on the one hand, it sends shivers down their spine. On the other hand, the possibility of some sort of a moderate coalition of a Joe Manchin, Sinema, Mitt Romney might be the way through also to get through.
It might, and you talked to Joe Manchin about this very issue, and it's really fascinating, you know, what he is proposing to try to bring these moderate coalitions together to address this very important issue. This is something that, you know, the American public would expect that our U.S. Congress would do. You wouldn't let us default. That's what Manchin is trying to get to. But the question's going to be, is there the support? Is there enough moderates there to do that?
The applause you're hearing, and we're seeing actually on the screen, is Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, coming in and giving a peck on the cheek to the second gentleman, second gentleman. Yes, the second gentleman, exactly. I have to get my numbers right here. Exactly. So, Maria, as we talk about the possibility of perhaps a moderate coalition, is that something the White House would be intrigued by?
Well, I think so. You saw President Biden last year spend a considerable amount of time with Joe Manchin, right, where we always had the cameras running in. Joe Manchin's headed to the White House as well. And I think the president in his heart is a moderate as well, right? He's governed that way for a long time, and when he was in the Senate and both as vice president and even now.
And now, as you probably heard there, we now have the cabinet coming in to the chamber. Proceeding down the aisle, some shaking of hands there, some greeting of the cabinet, and led by Secretary of State Tony Blinken, because that is the first cabinet position, as I recall, it was the first section of government created was the State Department. And so they're coming down now to take their seats. As we wait for President Biden's address, which should come within the next 5-10 minutes, we would expect. So I wonder, Rick, coming from, as you do, from sort of the Republican side, is Joe Manchin more powerful now after the election in November or less?
Well, look, I mean, less in the terms of just his influence to shape legislation because they desperately needed his vote. But the reality is only having one extra vote in the Senate really doesn't matter, because at any given time, there are 2 or 3 other senators who are willing to join the coalition of the willing and frankly, betray the leadership to get something done. And so I think he continues to be incredibly influential, and he's running for re-election this year. So you know he's going to want to, you know, have the spotlight on him and look like he's trying to get something done. So I think he's one to watch. I would also point out there is one cabinet member missing, and that happens to be the newly resigned Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh,
good point,
who I guess is both in a undisclosed location that may actually be a doghouse. So we'll be missing Marty on his last day of work.
Yeah, we should be clear about that. The report is he's actually going to take over representing the NHL Players Association, right?
Correct.
As a labor negotiator, he'd be pretty good at that. We're watching here on TV now Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, come down and greet people as the members of the cabinet continue to process in. So Jeannie, coming back to you and Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from West Virginia, will he be a Democrat in the next election?
That is the big question. As Rick is telling us, he's sitting with the Republicans tonight. He's got to make Chuck Schumer's blood boil. But, you know, Joe Manchin has long said he will remain a Democrat. You know, he does have a really tough re-election fight ahead of him this year. The Democrats have a really, really awful map in 24, and he is part of that map. They're defending an enormous number of seats. And so, you know, if he was to go, imagine the shakeup in the Senate. They've already lost Kristen Sinema. But I would just say on the issue of the cabinet, a remarkably stable cabinet for Joe Biden. While we have now presumably lost Marty Walsh, this is a cabinet that 2 years in has remained remarkably stable, because we usually see turnover much more quickly.
I'm so glad you made that point, because I was going to go to the broader issue with Mario Parker about the White House staff, because remarkably remarkably stable cabinet. We'll see what happens in the coming days. But there are some big changes coming up at the White House. In fact, I think this is Jeff Zients' first appearance probably as chief of staff.
Yes, Ron Klain just recently left the White House as well. The president has notoriously had just this very insular network, right? He's got these trusted advisors that have been around him since the 1980s, who he's comfortable with as well. So it'll be interesting to see now as we enter this period of a bit of turnover here, how the White House message shifts as well as we look toward 2024.
Well, I wonder about that, Rick, and this is projecting, obviously, on my part about what's going on. As we've said, whether you agree with it or not, the Biden administration got a lot through Congress in the last Congress, a lot of legislation, particularly considering how narrowly divided the Congress was. Now we turn perhaps into an execution phase where they have to implement it. And the difference between Ron Klain and Jeff Zients, some people have suggested that Jeff Zients is the ultimate executioner. He's the one who came in and sort of saved Obamacare, that website that was a disaster when they first had it.
Right, yeah. That is the reason I think he's the chief of staff, because it's certainly not because he knows how to run presidential campaigns and he may be in a presidential cycle. So they've been talking in the White House about the theme of the speech being job left, still there's jobs to do. And that is going to be what resonates with the new chief of staff, because they did pass an enormous amount of legislation all about the $1 trillion in infrastructure spending and on clean energy. And he's got 2 years to make good on that. And you've seen the president really commit himself to traveling around the country in advance of this speech. And as Mario pointed out earlier, on his way out tomorrow to do the same thing, talking about these projects in the states, launching these projects, showing the American people that that legislation is actually shovel-ready projects are getting done, and that he's having a real impact on jobs and the economy.
And just we're watching on TV now, the outgoing leadership of the Democrats in the House. That's Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, and Steny Hoyer, the majority leader in the House of Representatives. And we saw just briefly a moment ago Mark Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, go down onto the floor. But I'm curious, Jeannie, as you look at it, about the possibility, we don't know if it's going to have the possibility of another run for Joe Biden for president. How much of his position going into 2024 would be determined exactly by what we're talking about, which is we got the legislation through. It's nice to talk about that, but until you actually see the boots on the ground, the shovels on the ground, you don't get any credit for it. Actually executing on that might give more credit than they're getting right now. As we talked about, they're not getting a lot of credit at the moment.
That's right, because all the American people know at this point is you spent $1.7 trillion on an infrastructure bill, but my bridge next door is still broken down. I don't have broadband. So the execution phase is going to be critical. The reality is a lot of that won't get done in 2 years, but they've got to show that they are making progress on that and show the American public there are real benefits to this spending. We are not just spending and driving up the debt. We are creating jobs. We are fixing your neighborhoods, your roads. I live in New York. You do too, David. We know we need some new infrastructure there across the country. He's got to show on the ground that that's really paying off. And so that's going to be incredibly important for this chief of staff and this president.
The potholes on 57th Street.
My
If you just get that done. I know, exactly right. They're wrecking our cars.
The United States.
And here we have the announcement of the President of the United States, Joe Biden, coming down the aisle, being escorted, shaking hands. There is the First Lady, Joe Biden, up in the balcony. He'll be shaking a few hands on the way down here. This will probably take a few minutes to take place. Big smile on his face, obviously, as we watch the president proceed. So Mario, to come back to you a bit here, we have not just the president going to Madison tomorrow. We've got, I would call it a blitz around the country, with the cabinet going everywhere. How are they picking where they're going?
Well, if you look at it, you look at the map, right? So I think he'll be going to Pennsylvania later in the week. Vice President Harris will be on the road. They're all fanning out to some of these hot spots. A couple of things, right? So not only to the battleground states, but also, and I think Jeannie kind of hit on this point with Manchin's tough re-election as well, Democrats just haven't done well with rural voters. And so you're seeing some of those cabinet members go to places that are red states, but also to make entries with these rural voters that Democrats have left behind as well.
So as the president continues to make his way down that aisle, it is taking him a little bit of time to do it. The remarks are out. We have a draft of remarks. And the one thing I think, Rick, we know for sure, at least I think I can predict, he's going to say the State of the Union is strong. That tends to be what presidents say.
It is, but he's got to be careful because the people he's talking to, the American public, aren't buying that. And so he can't look disconnected on the very first sentence of this speech. So I suspect the writers and he have worked very hard to craft some version of that doesn't make people think that he's out of touch.
Gene, I have to say, and you be a student of this, as I said, a political science professor, there is the substance of this as a positive. There's also the theater of it. And the theater counts. When you're a leader, and particularly when you're the leader of the United States, talking to, as you say, 38, 39 million people, looking for the theater. What, if you were advising the president, what would you try to do on the theater of it to convey the right message?
You know, I would just hope this does not become a laundry list. I would hope he hits on big themes and stays away from the laundry list. I fear I may be wrong. And on this issue of the State of the Union is strong, I was just listening to Gerald Ford, an old tape in his State of the Union where he said the State of the Union's not so good. And I was struck by the fact that you seldom hear presidents in the modern era say that. We won't hear Biden say it tonight. But it really was a reflection of the time.
But he was from Michigan.
Your home state.
Prone to honesty.
He's prone to honesty, a good Midwesterner.
That's exactly right. So what has the president done to prepare for this, Mario?
Well, he was in Camp David all weekend, all the way up until late yesterday, just practicing his speech from what we understand. He's been looking forward to it. This is his test run for 2024, right? He has to figure out a way to break through and get credit for those accomplishments that Americans feel that they aren't seeing from him.
We just saw the president shake hands with the Chief Justice of the United States. He's working his way down the Supreme Court of the United States now. He's followed by Steve Scalise there, also Hakeem Jeffries, leadership in the House. And as it usually happens here, he wants to stop and talk to everybody. Everybody wants to sort of shake his hand. I suspect Republican or Democrat, right, Jeannie?
Oh, absolutely. You want to shake the president's hand. This is a big moment for our members of Congress, our senators, our representatives. This is once a year they're gathered with their colleagues. And now, of course, they all bring guests, which is sort of a new development where not only the president and the first lady bring guests, but the senators and representatives as well. But certainly a really important and historic moment for all of them.
I'm so glad you raised that, Rick. What is it with the guests? I don't remember this before. I mean, I remember, didn't Ronald Reagan first have somebody?
Yeah, Ronald Reagan first had some of the heroes that he pointed out in his speech.
Every single person gets to bring a guest or two?
The entire balcony of the House of Representatives are guests who all should actually have their story told, I guess. But one thing I would note, Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker, wanted to give the President a warm welcome. And from what I can tell, all the Republican House members are standing and applauding. So
very good point.
So far, so good for the decorum of the House of Representatives.
As is the Speaker of the House applauding there as the President shakes hands first with the Vice President, Kamala Harris, and now with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. And now he steps to the podium. Normally there's a fair amount of applause and back and forth before he actually gets to start his remarks, but we're getting closer to it, I think it's fair to say. It's a special moment for the country and certainly for this man, Joe Biden. A little message there for Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House.
Hello, hello, hello.
I think the president now is trying to say something.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
And quite an accolade. And quite an accolade. And again, Rick made a very important point. Everybody's standing, at least for this part.
Thank you. You can smile. It's okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Please. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, good to see you guys up there. Members of Congress. By the way, Chief Justice, I may need a court order. She gets to go to the game tomorrow, next week. I have to stay home. Got to work something out here. Members of the Cabinet, leaders of our military, Chief Justice, Associate Justice, and retired Justice of the Supreme Court, and to you, my fellow Americans. You know, I start tonight by congratulating the 118th Congress and the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. And I want to congratulate the new leader of the House Democrats, the first African-American minority leader in history, Hakeem Jeffries. He won in spite of the fact I campaigned for him. Congratulations to the longest-serving leader in the history of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. Where are you, Mitch? And congratulations to Chuck Schumer, another term as Senate Minority Leader. I think you. Only this time you have a slightly bigger majority, Mr. Leader. You're the majority leader. About that much bigger? Yeah, well, I tell you what. I want to give special recognition to someone who I think is going to be considered the greatest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Folks, the story of America is a story of progress and resilience, of always moving forward, of never, ever giving up. It's a story unique among all nations. We're the only country that has emerged from every crisis we've ever entered stronger than we got into it. Look, folks, that's what we're doing again. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years, because of you all, because of the American people. 2 years ago, COVID had shut down, our businesses were closed, our schools were robbed of so much, and today, COVID no longer controls our lives. And 2 years ago, democracy faced its greatest threat to the Civil War, and today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken. As we gather here tonight, we're writing the next chapter in the great American story, a story of progress and resilience. When world leaders ask me to define America, and they do, believe it or not, I say I can define it in one word, and I mean this: possibilities. We don't think anything is beyond our capacity. Everything is a possibility. You know, we're often told that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. But over the past 2 years, we've proved the cynics and naysayers wrong. Yes, we disagreed plenty. And yes, there were times when Democrats went alone. But time and again, Democrats and Republicans came together to defend a stronger and safer Europe. You came together to pass once in a generation infrastructure law, building bridges connecting our nation and our people. We came together to pass the most significant law ever, helping victims exposed to toxic burn pits. And in fact, it was important. And in fact, I signed over 300 bipartisan pieces of legislation since becoming president, from reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, to the Electoral Count Reform Act, the Respect for Marriage Act that protects the right to marry the person you love. And to my Republican friends, if we could work together the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together and find consensus on important things in this Congress as well. I think folks, you all are as formed as I am, but I think the people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere. That's always been my vision of our country, and I know it's many of yours. To restore the soul of this nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, America's middle class, and to unite the country. We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view. For decades, the middle class has been hollowed out in more than, and not no one administration, but for a long time. Too many good-paying manufacturing jobs moved overseas. Factories closed down. Once thriving cities and towns that many of you represent became shadows of what they used to be. And along the way, something else we lost: pride, our sense of self-worth. I ran for president to fundamentally change things, to make sure our economy works for everyone, so we can all feel that pride in what we do. To build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. Because when the middle class does well, the poor have a ladder up, and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. I know a lot of you always kid me for always quoting my dad, but my dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. He really would say this. It's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Well, folks, so let's look at the results. We're not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but unemployment rate is at 3.4%, a 50-year low. A near record unemployment. Near record unemployment for Black and Hispanic workers. We've already created, your help, 800,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years. And where is it written? Where is it written that America can't lead the world in manufacturing? And I don't know where that's written. For too many decades, we imported projects and exported jobs. Now, thanks to what you've all done, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. Folks, inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies as well as food supplies, blocking all that grain in Ukraine. But we're better positioned than any country on earth right now. But we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up. Additionally, over the last 2 years, a record 10 million Americans applied to start new businesses. 10 million. And by the way, every time someone starts a small business is an act of hope. And Madam Vice President, I want to thank you for leading that effort to ensure that small businesses have access to capital and the historic laws we enacted that are going to just come into being. Standing here last year, I shared with you a story of American genius and possibilities. Semiconductors, small computer chips the size of a fingerprint that power everything, from cell phones to automobiles and so much more. These chips were invented in America. Let's get that straight. They were invented in America. We used to make 40% of the world's chips. In the last several decades, we lost our edge. We're down to only producing 10%. We all saw what happened during the pandemic when chip factories shut down overseas. Today's automobiles need 3,000 chips, each of those automobiles. But American automobiles couldn't make enough cars because there weren't enough chips. Car prices went up, people got laid off, so did everything from refrigerators to cell phones. We can never let that happen again. That's why we came together to pass the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Folks, I know I've been criticized for saying this, but I'm not changing my view. We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. The supply chain begins in America. We've already created 800,000 new manufacturing jobs without this law, before the law kicks in. With this new law, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs across the country. And I mean all across the country, throughout not just the coast, but through the middle of the country as well. That's going to come from companies that have announced more than $300 billion in investment in American manufacturing over the next few years. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, Intel is building semiconductor factories on 1,000 acres, literally a field of dreams. It's going to create 10,000 jobs, that one investment, 7,000 construction jobs, 3,000 jobs in those factories once they're finished. They call them factors. Jobs paying an average of $130,000 a year, and many do not require a college degree. Jobs. Because we work together, these jobs where people don't have to leave home to search for opportunity. And it's just getting started. Think about the new homes, the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses. So much more that's going to be needed to support those 3,000 permanent jobs and the factories that are going to be built. Talk to mayors and governors, Democrats and Republicans, and they'll tell you what this means for their communities. We're seeing these field of dreams transform to the heartland. But to maintain the strongest economy in the world, we need the best infrastructure in the world. And folks, as you all know, we used to be #1 in the world in infrastructure. We've sunk to 13th in the world. The United States of America, 13th in the world in infrastructure, modern infrastructure. But now we're coming back because we came together and passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, the largest investment in infrastructure since President Eisenhower's interstate highway system. And folks, already we've funded over 20,000 projects, including major airports from Boston to Atlanta to Portland. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet, all across America. Urban, rural, tribal. And folks, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. And I mean it sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law, and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in those districts as well. But don't worry. I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects. And I'll see you at the groundbreaking. Look, this law will further unite all of America. Projects like Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky over the Ohio River, built 60 years ago, badly needed repairs, one of the nation's most congested freight routes, carrying $2 billion worth of freight every single day across the Ohio River. And folks, I've been talking about fixing it for decades, but we're really finally going to get it done. Yes. I went there last month, with Democrats and Republicans and from both states to deliver a commitment of $1.6 billion for this project. And while I was there, I met a young woman named Sarah, who's here tonight. I don't know where Sarah is. Is she up in the box? I don't know. Sarah, how are you? Well, Sarah, for 30 years, I learned, she told me she'd been a proud member of the Iron Workers Local 44, known as the Cowboys in the Sky. The folks who built Cincinnati's skyline. Sarah said she can't wait to be 10 stories above the Ohio River building that new bridge. God bless her. That's pride. And that's what we're also building. We're building back pride. Look, we're also replacing poisonous lead pipes that go into 10 million homes in America, 400,000 school and child care centers. So every child in America can drink the water instead of having permanent damage to their brain. Look, we're making sure that every community in America has access to affordable high-speed internet. No parent should have to drive by McDonald's parking lot to help them do their homework online with their kids, which thousands were doing across the country. And when we do these projects, and again I get criticized for this, but I make no excuses for it, we're going to buy American. We're going to buy America. Folks, and it's totally consistent with international trade rules. Buy America has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it. Not anymore. Tonight, I'm announcing new standards that require all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. Made in America. I mean it. Lumber, glass, drywall, fiber optic cable. And on my watch, American roads, bridges, and American highways are going to be made with American products as well. Folks, my economic plan is about investing in places and people that have been forgotten. So many of you listening to me tonight, I know you feel it. So many of you felt like you've just simply been forgotten. Amid the economic upheaval of the past 4 decades, too many people have been left behind and treated like they're invisible. Maybe that's you watching from home. Remember the jobs that went away. You remember them, don't you? The folks at home remember them. You wonder whether the path even exists anymore for your children to get ahead without having to move away. Well, that's why I get that. That's why we're building an economy where no one's left behind. Jobs are coming back. Pride is coming back. Because choices we made in the last several years. You know, this is, in my view, a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America and make a real difference in your lives at home. For example, too many of you lay in bed at night like my dad did, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name happens if your spouse gets cancer or your child gets deadly ill, or something happens to you. What are you going to have? You get money to pay for those medical bills? Or are you going to have to sell the house or try to get a second mortgage on it? I get it. I get it. With the Inflation Reduction Act that I signed into law, we're taking on powerful interests to bring health care costs down so you can sleep better at night with more security. You know, we pay more for prescription drugs than any nation in the world. Let me say it again. We pay more for prescription drugs than any major nation on earth. For example, 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. Many of you in this chamber do, and in the audience. But every day, millions need insulin to control their diabetes so they can literally stay alive. Insulin's been around for over 100 years. The guy who invented it didn't even patent it because he wanted it to be available for everyone. It cost the drug companies roughly $10 a vial to make that insulin. Packaging and all, you may get up to $13. But Big Pharma has been unfairly charging people hundreds of dollars, $400 to $500 a month, making record profits. Not anymore. Not anymore. So many things that we did are only now coming to fruition. We said we were doing this, and we said we passed the law to do it, but people didn't know because the law didn't take effect until January 1 of this year. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare. People are just finding out. I'm sure you're getting the same calls I'm getting. Look, there are millions of other Americans who do not or are not on Medicare, including 200,000 young people with type 1 diabetes who need this insulin to stay alive. Let's finish the job this time. Let's cap the cost of insulin for everybody at $35. Folks, and Big Pharma's still going to do very well, I promise you all. I promise you they're going to do very well. This law also caps and won't even go into effect until 2025. It costs out-of-pocket drug costs for seniors on Medicare at a maximum of $2,000 a year. You don't have to pay more than $2,000 a year, no matter how much your drug costs are. Because you know why? You all know it. Many of you, like many in my family, have cancer. You know the drugs can range from $10,000, $11,000, $14,000, $15,000 for the cancer drugs. And if drug prices rise faster than inflation, drug companies are going to have to pay Medicare back the difference. We're finally giving Medicare the power to negotiate drug prices. Bringing down prescription drug costs doesn't just save seniors money, it cuts the federal deficit by billions of dollars, by hundreds of billions of dollars, because these prescription drugs are drugs purchased by Medicare to keep their commitment to the seniors. Well, guess what? Instead of paying $400 or $500 a month, you're paying $15. That's a lot of savings for the federal government. And by the way, why wouldn't we want that? Now, some members here are threatening, and I know it's not an official party position, so I'm going to exaggerate, but threatening to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. As my coach, that's okay. That's fair. As my football coach used to say, lots of luck in your senior year. Make no mistake, if you try anything to raise the cost of prescription drugs, I will veto it. Look, I'm pleased to say that more Americans have health insurance now than ever in history. A record 16 million people are enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. And thanks to the law I signed last year, saving millions are saving $800 a year on their premiums. And by the way, that law was written and the benefit expires in 2025. So my plea to some of you, at least in this audience, let's finish the job and make these savings permanent. Expand coverage of Medicaid. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act is also the most significant investment ever in climate change. Ever. lowering utility bills, creating American jobs, leading the world to a clean energy future. I visited the devastating aftermath of record floods, droughts, storms, and wildfires from Arizona to Mexico to all the way up to the Canadian border. More timber has been burned, as I've observed from helicopters, than the entire state of Missouri. And we don't have global warming? Not a problem. In addition to emergency recovery, from Puerto Rico to Florida to Idaho, we're rebuilding for the long term. New electric grids that are able to weather major storms and not prevent those forest fires. Roads and water systems withstand the next big flood. Clean energy to cut pollution and create jobs in communities often left behind. We're going to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations installed across the country by tens of thousands of IBEW workers. And we're helping families save more than $1,000 a year with tax credits to purchase electric vehicles and efficient appliances, energy-efficient appliances. Historic conservation efforts to be responsible stewards of our land. Let's face reality. The climate crisis doesn't care if you're in a red or blue state. It's an existential threat. We have an obligation, not to ourselves, but to our children and grandchildren, to confront it. I'm proud of how America, at last, is stepping up to the challenge. We're still going to need oil and gas for a while. But guess what? No, we do. But there's so much more to do. We got to finish the job. And we pay for these investments in our future by finally making the wealthiest and biggest corporations begin to pay their fair share. Just begin. Look, I'm a capitalist. I'm a capitalist, but pay your fair share. I think a lot of you at home agree with me and many people that you know. The tax system is not fair. It is not fair. Look, the idea that in 2020, 55 of the largest corporations in America, the Fortune 500, made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes? Zero? Folks, it's simply not fair. But now, because of the law I signed, billion-dollar companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. God love them. 15%. That's less than a nurse pays. And let me be crystal clear. I said at the very beginning, under my plans, as long as I'm president, nobody earning less than $400,000 will pay an additional penny in taxes. Nobody, not one penny. But let's finish the job. There's more to do. We have to reward work, not just wealth. Pass my proposal for the billionaire minimum tax. You know, there's 1,000 billionaires in America. It's up from about 600 in the beginning of the term. But no billionaire should be paying a lower tax rate than a school teacher or firefighter. I mean it. Think about it. I mean, look. I know you aren't enthusiastic about that, but think about it. Think about it. Have you noticed Big Oil just reported its profits? Record profits. Last year, they made $200 billion in the midst of a global energy crisis. I think it's outrageous. Why? They invested too little of that profit to increase domestic production. And when I talk to a couple of them, they say, we're afraid you're going to shut down all the oil wells and all the oil refineries anyway, so why should we invest in them? I said, we're going to need oil for at least another decade. And that's going to exceed and beyond that. We're going to need it. Production. If they had, in fact, invested in the production to keep gas prices down, instead, they used the record profits to buy back their own stock, rewarding the CEOs and shareholders. Corporations ought to do the right thing. That's why I propose we quadruple the tax on corporate stock buybacks and encourage long-term investments. They'll still make considerable profit. Let's finish the job and close the loopholes that allow very wealthy to avoid paying their taxes. Instead of cutting the number of audits for wealthy taxpayers, I just signed a law to reduce the deficit by $114 billion by cracking down on wealthy tax cheats. That's being fiscally responsible. In the last 2 years, my administration has cut the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion, the largest deficit reduction in American history. Under the previous administration, the American deficit went up 4 years in a row. Because those record deficits, no president added more to the national debt in any 4 years than my predecessor. Nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check it out. How did Congress respond to that debt? They did the right thing. They lifted the debt ceiling 3 times without preconditions or crisis. They paid American bills to prevent an economic disaster in the country. So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit. Let's commit here tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare is off the books now, right? They're not to be spent. All right. We got unanimity. Social Security and Medicare are a lifeline for millions of seniors. Americans have to pay into them from the very first paycheck they start. So tonight, let's all agree, and apparently we are, let's stand up for seniors. Stand up and show them. We will not cut Social Security. We will not cut Medicare. Those benefits belong to the American people. They earned it. And if anyone tries to cut Social Security, which apparently no one's going to do, and if anyone tries to cut Medicare, I'll stop them. I'll veto it. And look, I'm not going to allow them to be taken away. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. But apparently it's not going to be a problem. Next month, when I offer my fiscal plan, I ask my Republican friends to lay down their plan as well. I really mean it. Let's sit down together and discuss our mutual plans together. Let's do that. I can tell you, the plan I'm going to show you is going to cut the deficit by another $2 trillion. and it won't cut a single bit of Medicare or Social Security. In fact, we're going to extend the Medicare Trust Fund at least 2 decades, because that's going to be the next argument. How do we keep it solvent, right? Well, we'll not raise tax on anyone making under 400 grand, but we'll pay for it the way we talked about tonight, by making sure that the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share. Look. Here's the deal. They aren't just taking advantage of the tax code. They're taking advantage of you, the American consumer. Here's my message to all of you out there. I have your back. We're already preventing Americans from receiving surprise medical bills, stopping $1 billion surprise bills per month so far. We're protecting seniors' life savings by cracking down on nursing homes that commit fraud, endanger patient safety, prescribe drugs that are not needed. Millions of Americans can now save thousands of dollars because they can finally get a hearing aid over the counter without a prescription. Look, capitalism without competition is not capitalism. It's extortion. It's exploitation. Last year, I cracked down with the help of many of you on foreign shipping companies that were making you pay higher prices for every good coming into the country. I signed a bipartisan bill that cut shipping costs by 90%, helping American farmers, businessmen, and consumers. Let's finish the job. Pass the bipartisan legislation to strengthen antitrust enforcement and prevent big online platforms from giving their own products an unfair advantage. My administration is also taking on junk fees, those hidden surcharges too many companies use to make you pay more. For example, we're making airlines show you the full ticket price up front, refund your money if your flight is canceled or delayed. We've reduced exorbitant bank overdrafts by saving consumers more than $1 billion a year. We're cutting credit card late fees by 75%, from $30 to $8. Look, junk fees may not matter to the very wealthy, but they matter to most other folks in homes like the one I grew up in, like many of you did. They add up to hundreds of dollars a month. They make it harder for you to pay your bills or afford that family trip. I know how unfair it feels when a company overcharges you and gets away with it. Not anymore. We've written a bill to stop it all. It's called the Junk Fee Prevention Act. We're going to ban surprise resort fees that hotels charge on your bill. Those fees can cost you up to $90 a night at hotels that aren't even resorts. The idea that cable, internet, and cell phone companies can charge you $200 or more if you decide to switch to another provider. Give me a break. We can stop service fees on tickets to concerts and sporting events and make companies disclose all the fees up front. And we'll prohibit airlines from charging $50 round trip for a family just to be able to sit together. Baggage fees are bad enough. Airlines can't treat your child like a piece of baggage. Americans are tired of being. We're tired of being played for suckers. So pass the Junk Fee Prevention Act so companies stop ripping us off. For too long, workers have been getting stiffed, but not anymore. We're beginning to restore the dignity of work. For example, I should have known this, but I didn't until 2 years ago. 30 million workers have to sign non-compete agreements for the jobs they take. 30 million. So a cashier at a burger place can't walk across town and take the same job at another burger place and make a few bucks more. It just changed. But they just changed it because we exposed it. That was part of the deal, guys. Look it up. But not anymore. We're banning those agreements so companies have to compete for workers and pay them what they're worth. And I must tell you, this is bound to get a response from my friends on my left but the right. I'm so sick and tired of companies breaking the law by preventing workers from organizing. Pass the PRO Act, because business have a right, workers have a right to form a union. And let's guarantee all workers have a living wage. Let's make sure working parents can afford to raise a family with sick days, paid family medical leave, affordable child care. That's going to enable millions of more people to go and stay at work. And let's restore the full child tax credit, which gave tens of millions of parents some breathing room and cut child poverty in half to the lowest level in history. And by the way, when we do all these things, we increase productivity, we increase economic growth. So let's finish the job and get more families access to affordable, quality housing. Let's get seniors who want to stay in their homes the care they need to do so. Let's give more breathing room to millions of family caregivers looking after their loved ones. Pass my plan so we get seniors and people with disabilities the home care and services they need. And support the workers who are doing God's work. These plans are fully paid for, and we can afford to do them. Restoring the dignity of work means making education an affordable ticket to the middle class. You know, when we made public education, 12 years of it, universal in the last century, we made the best educated, best paid, we became the best educated, best paid nation in the world. But the rest of the world's caught up. It's caught up. Jill, my wife, who teaches full time, has an expression. I hope I get it right, kid. Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. Any nation that out-educates is going to out-compete us. Folks, we all know 12 years of education is not enough to win the economic competition of the 21st century. We want to have the best educated workforce. Let's finish the job by providing access to preschool for 3 and 4 years old. Studies show that children who go to preschool are nearly 50% more likely to finish high school and go on to earn a 2 or 4 year degree, no matter their background they came from. Let's give public school teachers a raise. We're making progress by reducing student debt, increasing Pell Grants for working and middle-class families. Let's finish the job and connect students to career opportunities starting in high school. Provide access to 2 years of community college, the best career training in America, in addition to being a pathway to a 4-year degree. Let's offer every American a path to a good career, whether they go to college or not. And folks, in the midst of the COVID crisis, when schools were closed and we were shutting down everything, let's recognize how far we came in the fight against the pandemic itself. While the virus is not gone, thanks to the resilience of the American people and the ingenuity of medicine, we've broken the COVID grip on us. COVID deaths are down by 90%. We've saved millions of lives and opened up our country. We opened our country back up, and soon we'll end the public health emergency. But that's called a public health emergency. But we'll remember the toll and pain that's never going to go away. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives to COVID. 1 million. Families grieving, children orphaned, empty chairs at the dining room table constantly reminding you that she used to sit there. Remembering them, we remain vigilant. We still need to monitor dozens of variants and support new vaccines and treatments. So Congress needs to fund these efforts and keep America safe. And as we emerge from this crisis stronger, we're also got to double down on prosecuting criminals who stole relief money meant to keep workers and small businesses afloat. Before I came to office, you remember, During that campaign, the big issue was about inspector generals who would protect taxpayers' dollars who were sidelined. They were fired. Many people said we don't need them. And fraud became rampant. Last year, I told you the watchdogs are back. Since then, we've recovered billions of taxpayers' dollars. Now let's triple the anti-fraud strike force going after these criminals, double the statute of limitations on these crimes, and crack down on identity fraud by criminal syndicates stealing billions of dollars from the American people. And the data shows that for every dollar we put into fighting fraud, the taxpayers get back at least 10 times as much. It matters. It matters. Look, COVID left its scars, like the spike in violent crime in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. We have an obligation to make sure all people are safe. Public safety depends on public trust, as all of us know. But too often that trust is violated. Joining us tonight are the parents of Tyree Nichols. Welcome. We had to bury Tyree last week. As many of you personally know, there's no words to describe the heartache or grief of losing a child. But imagine if you lost that child at the hands of the law. Imagine having to worry whether your son or daughter came home from walking down the street, or playing in the park, or just driving a car. Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children, I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car. Here's what Tyree's mother shared with me when I spoke to her. When I asked her how she finds the courage to carry on and speak out. With the faith of God, she said her son was, quote, a beautiful soul, and something good will come of this. Imagine how much courage and character that takes. It's up to us, to all of us. We all want the same thing. Neighborhoods free of violence. Law enforcement who earns the community's trust. Just as every cop, when they pin on that badge in the morning, has a right to be able to go home at night, so does everybody else out there. Our children have a right to come home safely. Equal protection under the law is a covenant we have with each other in America. We know police officers put their lives on the line every single night and day. And we know we ask them in many cases to do too much, to be counselors, social workers, psychologists, responding to drug overdoses, mental health crises, and so much more. In one sense, we ask much too much of them. I know most cops and their families are good, decent, honorable people, the vast majority. But they risk their lives every time they put that shield on. But what happened to Tyree in Memphis happens too often. We have to do better. Give law enforcement the real training they need. Hold them to higher standards. Help them succeed in keeping us safe. We also need more first responders and professionals to address the growing mental health, substance abuse challenges. More resources to reduce violent crime and gun crime. More community intervention programs. More investment in housing, education, and job training. All this can help prevent violence in the first place. And when police officers or police departments violate the public trust, they must be held accountable. With the support of the families of victims, civil rights groups, and law enforcement, I signed an executive order for all federal officers banning chokeholds, restricting no-knock warrants, and other key elements of the George Floyd Act. Let's commit ourselves to make the words of Tyler's mom true. Something good must come from this. Something good. And all of us, folks, it's difficult, but it's simple. All of us in this chamber, we need to rise to this moment. We can't turn away. Let's do what we know in our hearts that we need to do. Let's come together to finish the job on police reform. Do something. Do something. That was the plea of parents who lost their children in Uvalde. I met with every one of them. Do something about gun violence. Thank God. Thank God we did. Passing the most sweeping gun safety law in 3 decades. That includes things like that the majority of responsible gun owners already support. Enhanced background checks for 18 to 21 years old. Red flag laws, keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and others. But we know our work is not done. Joining us tonight is Brandon Say, a 26-year-old hero. Brandon put his college dreams on hold to be at his mom's side. His mom's side when she was dying from cancer. And Brandon now works at the dance studio started by his grandparents. And 2 weeks ago, during the Lunar New Year celebrations, he heard the studio door close, and he saw a man standing there pointing a semi-automatic pistol at him. He thought he was going to die, but he thought about the people inside. And in that instant, he found the courage to act and wrestled a semi-automatic pistol away from the gunman who had already killed 11 people in another dance studio. 11. He saved lives. It's time we do the same. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now. Once and for all. I led the fight to do that in 1994. In 10 years, that ban was law and mass shootings went down. After we let it expire in the Republican administration, mass shootings tripled. Let's finish the job and ban these assault weapons. And let's also come together on immigration. Make it a bipartisan issue once again. We know we now have a record number of personnel working to secure the border, arresting 8,000 human smugglers, seizing over 23,000 pounds of fentanyl in just the last several months. We've launched a new border plan last month. Unlawful migration from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela has come down 97% as a consequence of that. But American border problems won't be fixed until Congress acts. If we don't pass my comprehensive immigration reform, at least pass my plan to provide the equipment and officers to secure the border. And a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those on temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Here in the People's House, it's our duty to protect all the people's rights and freedoms. Congress must restore the right and the Congress must restore the right that was taken away in Roe v. Wade and protect Roe v. Wade. Give every woman a consular right. The Vice President and I are doing everything to protect access to reproductive health care and safeguard patient safety. But already more than a dozen states are enforcing extreme abortion bans. Make no mistake about it. If Congress passes a national ban, I will veto it. But let's also pass the Bipartisan Equality Act to ensure LGBTQ Americans, especially transgender young people, can live with safety and dignity. Our strength is not just the example of our power, but the power of our example. Let's remember the world's watching. I spoke in this chamber 1 year ago, just days after Vladimir Putin unleashed his brutal attack against Ukraine. A murderous assault, evoking images of death and destruction Europe suffered in World War II. Putin's invasion has been a test for the ages, a test for America, a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? We stand for the right of people to live free of tyranny? Will we stand for the defense of democracy? For such defense matters to us because it keeps peace and prevents open season on would-be aggressors and threatens our prosperity. 1 year later, we know the answer. Yes, we would, and we did. We did. And together, we did what America always does at our best. We led. We united NATO. We built a global coalition. We stood against Putin's aggression. We stood with the Ukrainian people. Tonight, we're once again joined by Ukrainian's ambassador to the United States. She represents not just her nation, but the courage of her people. Our ambassador is here, united. We're united in our support of your country. Will you stand so we can all take a look at you? Thank you. Because we're going to stand with you as long as it takes. Our nation is working for more freedom, more dignity, more peace, not just in Europe, but everywhere. Before I came to office, the story was about how the People's Republic of China was increasing its power and America was failing in the world. Not anymore. We made clear, and I made clear in my personal conversations, which have been many, with President Xi, that we seek competition, not conflict. But I will make no apologies that we're investing to make America stronger, investing in American innovation and industries that will define the future that China intends to be dominating, investing in our alliances and working with our allies to protect advanced technologies so they will not be used against us, modernizing our military to safeguard stability and deter aggression. Today, we're in the strongest position in decades to compete with China or anyone else in the world. Anyone else in the world. And I'm committed. I'm committed to work with China where we can advance American interests and benefit the world. But make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. Look, let's be clear. Winning the competition should unite all of us. We face serious challenges across the world. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracies have grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one. America's rallying the world to meet those challenges, from climate to global health, to food insecurity, to terrorism, to territorial aggression. Allies are stepping up, spending more, and doing more. Look, the bridges we're forming between partners in the Pacific and those in the Atlantic, and those who bet against America are learning how wrong they are. It's never, ever been a good bet to bet against America. Never. Well, when I came to office, most assured that bipartisanship assumed was impossible, but never believed it. That's why a year ago I offered a unity agenda to the nation as I stood here. We made real progress together. We passed a law making it easy for doctors to prescribe effective treatments for opioid addiction. We passed the gun safety law, making historic investments in mental health. We launched the ARPA-H drive for breakthrough in the fights against cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes, and so much more. We passed the Heath Robinson PACT Act, named after the late Iraq War veteran whose story about exposure to toxic burn kits I shared here last year. I understand something about those burn pits, but there's so much more to do. We can do it together. Joining us tonight is a father named Doug from Newton, New Hampshire. He wrote Jill, my wife, a letter, and me as well, about his courageous daughter, Courtney. A contagious laugh, his sister's best friend, her sister's best friend. He shared a story all too familiar to millions of Americans and many of you in the audience. Courtney discovered pills in high school. It spiraled into addiction and eventually death from a fentanyl overdose. She was just 20 years old. Describing the last 8 years without her, Doug said, "There's no worse pain." Yet their family has turned pain to purpose, working to end the stigma and change laws. He told us he wants to start a journey toward American recovery. Doug, we're with you. Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. Big, you got it. So let's launch a major surge to stop fentanyl production and the sale and trafficking with more drug detection machines, inspection cargo, stop pills and powder at the border. Working with couriers like FedEx to inspect more packages for drugs. Strong penalties to crack down on fentanyl trafficking. Second, let's do more on mental health, especially for our children. When millions of young people are struggling with bullying, violence, trauma, we give them greater access to mental health care at their schools. Yes. We must finally hold social media companies accountable for experimenting they're doing running children for profit. It's time to pass bipartisan legislation to stop big tech from collecting personal data on our kids and teenagers online. Ban targeted advertising to children and impose stricter limits on the personal data that companies collect on all of us. Third, let's do more to keep this nation's one truly sacred obligation to equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home. Job training, job placement for veterans and their spouses as they come to return to civilian life. Helping veterans afford the rent, because no one should be homeless in America, especially someone who served the country. Dennis McDonough is here of the VA. We had a first real discussion when I asked him to take the job. I'm glad he did. We were losing up to 25 veterans a day on suicide. Now we're losing 17 a day to the silent scourge of suicide. 17 veterans a day are committing suicide. More than all the people being killed in the wars. Folks, VA is doing everything it can, including expanding mental health screening, proven programs that recruits veterans to help other veterans understand what they're going through, get them the help they need. We got to do more. And fourth, last year, Jill and I reignited the cancer moonshot that I was able to start with President Obama asked me to lead our administration on this issue. Our goal is to cut the cancer death rates at least by 50% in the next 25 years, turn more cancers from death sentences to treatable diseases, provide more support for patients and their families. It's personal to so many of us in this audience. Joining us are Morris and Candice, an Irishman and the daughter of immigrants from Panama. They met and fell in love in New York City and got married in the same chapel Jill and I got married in New York City. Kindred spirits. He wrote us a letter about his little daughter, Ava, and I saw her just before I came over. She was just a year old when she was diagnosed with rare kidney disease, cancer. After 26 blood transfusions, 11 rounds of radiation, 8 rounds of chemo, 1 kidney removed, giving a 5% survival rate. He wrote how in the darkest moments he thought, if she goes, I can't stay. Many of you have been through that as well. Jill and I understand that like so many of you. And he read Jill's book describing our family's cancer journey and how we tried to steal moments of joy where we could with Bo. For them, that glimmer of joy was the half smile of their baby girl. It meant everything to them. They never gave up hope. Little Ava never gave up hope. She turns 4 next month. They just found out Ava's beating the odds, is on her way to being cured of cancer. And she's watching from the White House tonight if she's not asleep already. For the lives we can save. For the lives we can save and the lives we've lost, let this be a truly American moment that rallies the country and the world together and proves that we can still do big things. 20 years ago, under the leadership of President Bush and countless advocates and champions, he undertook a bipartisan effort through PEPFAR to transform the global fight against HIV/AIDS. It's been a huge success. He thought big. He thought large. He moved. I believe we can do the same thing with cancer. Let's end cancer as we know it. Cure some cancers once and for all. Folks, there's one reason why we've been able to do all of these things. Our democracy itself. It's the most fundamental thing of all. With democracy, everything's possible. Without it, nothing is. For the last few years, our democracy has been threatened and attacked, put at risk, put to the test in this very room on January the 6th. And then just a few months ago, an unhinged big lie assailed and unleashed a political violence at the home of the then Speaker of the House of Representatives, using the very same language the insurrectionists used as they stalked these halls and chanted on January 6th. Here tonight in this chamber is a man who bears the scars of that brutal attack, but is as tough and as strong, as resilient as they get. My friend Paul Pelosi. Paul, stand up. But such a heinous act should have never happened. We must all speak out. There's no place for political violence in America. We have to protect the right to vote, not suppress the fundamental right. Honor the results of our elections, not subvert the will of the people. We have to uphold the rule of law and restore trust in our institutions of democracy. And we must give hate and extremism in any form no safe harbor. Democracy must not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue. Every generation of Americans has faced a moment where they have been called to protect our democracy, defend it, stand up for it. And this is our moment. My fellow Americans, we meet tonight at an inflection point, one of those moments that only a few generations ever face, where the direction we now take is going to decide the course of this nation for decades to come. We're not bystanders of history. We're not powerless before the forces that confront us. It's within our power of we, the people. We're facing the test of our time. We have to be the nation we've always been at our best, optimistic, hopeful, forward-looking, a nation that embraces light over dark, hope over fear, unity over division, stability over chaos. We have to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. We're good people. The only nation in the world built on an idea, the only one. Other nations are defined by geography, ethnicity, but we're the only nation based on an idea that all of us, every one of us, is created equal in the image of God. A nation that stands as a beacon of the world. A nation in a new age of possibilities. So I've come to fulfill my constitutional obligation to report in the State of the Union. And here's my report. Because the soul of this nation is strong, because the backbone of this nation is strong, because the people of this nation are strong, the State of the Union is strong. I'm not new to this place. I stand here tonight having served as long as about any one of you have ever served here. But I've never been more optimistic about our future, about the future of America. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
And so President Joe Biden concludes his second State of the Union address as he now receives applause from at least parts of the crowd. He shakes hands with people around the dais. He'll make his way out that center aisle. He delivered a speech of about, I counted about an hour 12, hour 13 minutes, something like that, longer than he did last year. He started on a decidedly bipartisan note, congratulating Speaker McCarthy on becoming Speaker of the House and saying how many things that they had accomplished in a bipartisan way in the last Congress. And he went through a number of those things, some of which clearly Republicans agreed with, some of which maybe took a bit of a disagreement with. One of the things early on was infrastructure that everyone seemed to agree with, which was buy American. He's saying that they're only going to buy American as they invest in their infrastructure. Another point that was decidedly bipartisan was some of what the president had to say about policing and regulating police as he called for the George Floyd Act. He said that there should be more resources for police enforcement and for mental health, but also we should hold people accountable. And the Republicans, at least as far as I can tell, stood, certainly Speaker McCarthy stood and applauded as well. There were other aspects that were decidedly not bipartisan. One of them was about energy policy, where the president said that the oil companies shouldn't worry about investing in oil fields because oil would be around for at least another decade, which actually caused people to laugh in the chamber, particularly on the Republican side. Also, the border really raised a lot of questions. People yelled some fairly rude things to the president about what he wanted to do on the border. And when he talked about fentanyl, somebody yelled, "It's your fault fentanyl's coming in." So there was a lot in this speech. There was something of a laundry list of various issues that he would like to address that we'll be chewing over for some time to come. We're going to go on up to Capitol Hill for a reaction from Joe Matthew in a moment. But before that, let's go over to Hong Kong for a look at the global market reaction with Bloomberg's David Inglis. David?
Yeah, David, I'm just looking at the equity markets right now, and I guess it's worth keeping in mind that we're coming off, in terms of momentum, quite a strong close where you are over in the U.S., and that's really where, I guess, to borrow a phrase from the U.S. president, we're not really seeing buying American right now. It's really more buy European and Asian as we speak. So not a lot of momentum as far as U.S. futures are concerned. We're up ever so slightly across the Asian regional benchmark, as you can see here. That's really led by these tech-heavy indices like Taiwan and Korea, for example. Let's flip the boards, and it takes us really into the Chinese equity story, where there's really not a lot of momentum coming through today. And as you can see, we're fairly mixed. Outflows have continued when you look at some of these ETFs. The currency markets, which really underpins risk appetite so far recently, the dollar's coming off a second straight day. There's a little bit of weakness coming through in the equity space. I'd single out the euro, which really bounced off that 50-day moving average. That's a level to watch, I guess, as far as support levels are concerned. Rates, FX, we talked about FX. Let's have a look at rates and money markets here. So two things here. Treasuries continue to see that rally in the Asia Pacific, with yields coming down on your 2s and your 10s. And when you look at your 1-year interbank rate in China, that continues to move up. So liquidity issues there within that specific market. That's a 2-year high right now on overnight borrowing costs. I'll end on this. The other big story in markets right now is this big move up in energy prices. So Brent, as we speak, is steady, but we're seeing a lot of catch up in the Shanghai contract. We're up 4% as far as that one is concerned. But it's a quiet day across equity markets, David, as I pointed out earlier. Volumes are not quite there. We're about a quarter lighter than what we are used to seeing for this time of the day. Back to you guys.
David, thank you so much. That's David English reporting on the markets. I must say, I'm not sure that what the president had to say is going to relieve much of the energy pressure on the prices there that we just heard about. And now we want to go up to Capitol Hill for our Washington correspondent, Joe Matthew, who's been up there. He's the host of Sound On, of course, weekdays on Bloomberg Radio at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So, Joe, you've been up there on the Hill. Give us your sense as we're continuing to watch, frankly, the president make his way out of the chamber. It doesn't seem to be a big hurry, actually, for his to leave. But what sense do you have of the reaction up there?
Well, it was quite a speech. We actually got several speeches in one. It seems like, David, the lawmakers, by the way, are just exiting the chamber now and passing us here as we set up in Statuary Hall. We're just adjacent to the House chamber, where the president is still making his way, of course, and delivered the big speech just ending a couple of moments ago here. Interesting, you know, we have to start at the beginning here, David. He began the speech by congratulating Kevin McCarthy on his new speakership. He turned in the speaker's rostrum to shake his hand in front of very skeptical Republican House caucus here. And he talked about bipartisanship. To your point that you just made a bit earlier, some very successful strokes early in the speech, talking about infrastructure, talking about some of the issues that he believed that he could not have been able to manage without Republican support, and said, we passed 300 bills together. Let's keep doing this. I call on everyone to keep working together. But there was a real chill in the room when he started going through economic policies, for instance, when he touched the debt ceiling. And by then, when we heard Marjorie Taylor Greene yelling liar, along with a couple of other members of the Republican caucus from the very back of the room, things got pretty unruly here. And David, as you watched, as he worked through climate change and even the gun issue, Speaker McCarthy had to repeatedly shush his caucus. He had to repeatedly ask them to stop here. You know, brings us back to 2009 when then Congressman Joe Wilson yelled, "You lied," at President Barack Obama. That was a huge deal, a massive break in decorum when it happened. And David, it speaks to the political climate that we're in right now, that this is considered par for the course on a night like this.
Yeah, indeed, Joe. So you'll be talking to some of the members as they come out, I know. But was there some, do you think, germ of some bipartisanship there that maybe they could work with?
Well, I think so. And, you know, look, police reform was the ultimate example of that. Pointing to Tyree Nichols' parents in that emotional moment in the chamber and actually seeing the speaker stand and applaud along with them as the president said, just do something. Follow what's in your heart and just do something. That is a matter that has managed to pass the House in a Democratic majority. There are a lot of skeptics, though, David, that the George Floyd and Policing Act could pass the House again and move through the Senate. There's a conversation now in the Democratic caucus about maybe whittling that down to more narrow issues, like de-escalation training, like banning chokeholds. These have had support in the past, and the president may have cracked open a bit of an opening here on getting something done there.
Okay, Joe, thank you so much for reporting on that. That's Joe Matthew from Capitol Hill, and we'll, of course, listen to him again tomorrow on Showdown at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, a program that he hosts. We're going to come back to the panel now as we continue to watch President Biden make his way at a fairly leisurely pace, at least I would say, out of the chamber. He's no big rush to leave at the moment. A lot of people want to talk to him. But I'm going to bring in now Peggy Collins, who is our Washington bureau chief here for Bloomberg. So, Peggy, you particularly focus on the economy. There was a fair amount in here, actually, on the economy, some of which got some support from Republicans, a lot of which did not. What stood out for you?
That's right, David. So I think starting off, he talked a lot about jobs in the manufacturing industry, blue-collar jobs. I think that's really where a lot of the focus in the administration is going. He touched a little bit on inflation, but didn't spend a lot of time on that. And, you know, it was a contrast to Fed Chair Powell speaking just hours earlier here in D.C. when he said, you know, we've got a long way to go on inflation. So I think Biden intentionally didn't want to spend a lot of time on that because the economy is still struggling there. And really where things got tense was around the debt ceiling. And I think what we saw by some of the interchange between Republicans and Democrats, as Joe was just saying in the hall there, was around this debt ceiling fight where Biden is saying we're not going to be held hostage. We have to raise the debt ceiling. And some Republicans are basically saying, you know, maybe we need to look at entitlement programs. And Biden was trying to say to the American people, you know, your Medicare and Social Security are under threat. Republicans saying that's a lie. That's not what we're doing. So I think this fight over entitlement programs and the debt ceiling is only going to get hotter.
Well, it's a really good point, Peggy, because one of the moments that really seemed to break down for the president was when he said that basically there were some Republicans, he said not the entire party, but some Republicans were suggesting that we should sunset Medicare and Social Security. There was a lot of disruption in the chamber on that from the Republican side, because that's a very sensitive subject. At the same time, the president has been saying, if you want to cut spending, where are you going to cut it?
Right, exactly. So Republicans saying, no, that's not true. We don't want to, you know, cut Medicaid or Medicare and Social Security, those big kahuna entitlement programs. But at the same time, Republicans are saying, we want some negotiation. We want some cuts to spending. So where are you going to get it except from those entitlement programs?
Okay, so Peggy, please stay with us. But I want to bring back in Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Let's pick up on something Joe was talking about. I'm curious because I'm not sure what I think. Do we think, Rick, that this was more, if I can use the term, disrespectful of the president than earlier States of the Union, or is it pretty much par on course for at least some of them?
Yeah, I think the modern State of the Union, you've got to expect some give and take, right? This is not the sit on your hands and, you know, applaud when your Democrats are happy and applaud when Republicans are happy. This is much more interactive, and it's been this way quite some time. I really saw this come to light during the second term of, you know, Obama's administration, and was no different during the Trump presidency when he was giving speeches. In fact, I think most of it pales to the ripping up of the speech act that Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker, did, you know, at the end of his speech in 2020. So, look, it's just what we have to bring to the table. I would say Republicans reacted very negatively to that part of the speech that had basically Biden saying that not all but some Republicans have said they want to cut and sunset Social Security and Medicare. And the leadership of the Republican Party in both the Senate and the House has made it very clear since day one that they are not going to touch that. And so I think they just saw that as a gross misrepresentation of their opinion, just because a couple of members have actually had that in a policy document that they released. It was never embraced by the Republican Party. And so when he then said, I'm not going to allow anybody to touch Social Security and Medicare, the Republicans all stood up and applauded. I mean, it was a bipartisan approach. So I just think that if you want to talk about the unruliness of Republicans, he baited them into it. I mean, it wasn't innocent on his part. And I think that was actually what I took from the speech, is that he actually had a lot of fun playing with Republicans tonight. I mean, he said, on one hand, we can do lots together, as Joe mentioned, 300 different bills we passed the last 2 years. We can do it again. And there were incredible amounts of bipartisan approach to things that I would not have expected, like on policing that you mentioned earlier. But he also was game to sort of stick it in their eye on a number of issues, and the border was one, and Social Security and Medicaid was another. So I think he knew what he was doing. He wanted to get that reaction, and I think he got what he was expecting.
Well, he's a pro, so I'm sure he knew what he was doing. But Jeannie, what was it that he was doing? Because I don't quite understand. understand, because I don't understand that to be received Republican policy. The president himself admitted it wasn't received Republican. But is that basically looking to 2024 because he thinks voters are really going to get scared if they think the Republicans are even thinking about Social Security and Medicare? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and we know that voters are scared when they are thinking about Medicare and Social Security. So that is tried and tested throughout American politics. That's why when Rick Scott raised this issue before the midterm, Democrats pounced on it, and they've been talking about it ever since. And all they needed was one Republican to say it, and they ran with it. And they'll continue to run with it. The other thing is he wants to force Republicans to come to the table and say, what are you talking about when you're talking about cutting? I mean, Peggy is so right. You know, there's this issue of the debt ceiling out there. It's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. He and the Democrats are going to try to goad the Republicans into saying, you want to cut? What do you want to cut? And they don't want to come out first, of course, politically. So that's where we find ourselves. And, you know, here's a president who came in with sagging approval numbers. And a lot of that has to do with questions about his age and whether he's up to running in 2024. And I think he did a pretty good job tonight of saying, I'm energetic. To Rick's point, I'm having some fun. And he wanted Republicans in that chamber to do exactly what Marjorie Taylor Greene did, because that's how he came close to him having a historic, not victory in 2022, but really, really fended off some great losses in that red wave in 22 by describing them as, you know, going overboard, being MAGA Republicans. So the more extreme they seem, the better off for him as he looks to 2024, and that's where we find ourselves.
And for our radio audience, we're continuing to watch President Biden work his way out of that chamber. He still is not out of the chamber yet. As I say, doesn't appear to be in a very big hurry. But Peggy, I want to come back to you. You're based here in Washington. You know politics, even though you really cover economics particularly. But I wonder on this debt ceiling issue that Jeannie talks about, I wonder when the two sides will get serious. I don't mean to say they're not serious, but neither side is really making serious offers. I mean, when President Biden goes and says, okay, I'll fix the spending problem by having a billionaire's tax, and we're going to do an appraisal every year on everybody's wealth, and also, by the way, we'll quadruple the surcharge on stock buybacks, that's not going to get done in a split Congress. Not going to get done. On the other hand, we're not going to cut Social Security. So when are we getting into a point where those two sides actually start to talk seriously about this problem?
Well, I think it's a ways to go before, for some of the reasons you said. The tax policies that Biden put out there tonight are basically a no-go, that people think they'll be a non-starter in a split Congress. And on the other hand, the Republicans are just getting their people on committees, right? They're still organizing in terms of running the House right now. So I think we've got some structural issues before we even get to some of the actual give and take that may happen.
So I want to come back to the sort of demeanor here, if we could, Rick, because it struck me at least. When the president started, he was going at a breakneck speed. Now, I thought he slowed down some, and I'll even suggest, and this is terrible of me to suggest, maybe he even made a mistake when he got to energy policy, because when he said, look, there's not a problem with investing, having long-term capital investments, because we'll have oil around for at least 10 years, and people laughed, and the Republicans. I don't know much about energy policy, but to say to a company, you got 10 years, go ahead, invest a lot of money, it doesn't seem to make much sense to me. Did he just go off script to make a mistake, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the core of it. When he did go off script, like around energy policy and the border, you know, it kind of disrupted the flow. I would say he was doing really well up until those moments because he was able to catalyze his arguments, he was sticking to the script, and he had a great pace. I think it was obvious that they'd said, look, you got to look energetic, Joe. I mean, you're 80 years old. You're the oldest guy to ever give a State of the Union speech. Don't go slow. And so the reality is, even though it was a long speech, he really started out at a fast clip. But then he got bollocksed up around a few of these moments where he tried to sort of ad-lib, and the ad-lib backfired on him badly in at least two of those occasions. I would say, look, at the end, we're going to really trying to think, what did the American people take from this speech? You know, here's a president in his bully pulpit. He actually got to tell people for over an hour and 15 or 12 minutes, you know, what he wanted. And even though there were these disruptions, you didn't really get that in the American public. You got what he was saying. And so that, one, huge advantage for Joe Biden. Two, did he connect? I do think he connected well on the stories of the heroes. Those things were classic vintage Joe Biden, the stories, the empathy. I thought that was really well done. But were voters really convinced that what he was talking about tonight on the economic issues, on infrastructure, on policing, are the things that really are going to impact them. And I would say, I don't think he really connected that well. It was sort of laundry list, and I was not expecting that out of Joe Biden tonight.
For our audience, just to explain what's going on, we're continuing to watch. If you're on television, you can see Joe Biden, the President of the United States, working his way out of the chamber. We are waiting for a Republican response. It's supposed to come from Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. We've not heard yet when that will happen, but it will happen shortly, I'm sure. So we will bring that to you live when it does happen. So Jeannie, what did you think about the demeanor, the delivery, the extent to which he connected, to use Rick's term?
You know, I have to say there were a few things that surprised me to your question that were left out of the speech that I think may have connected. Number one, he had an opportunity here to explain the balloon. I never heard once, and was I wrong, the word balloon come up. And, you know, that surprised me because this has been a vacuum in the American public's mind for a few days now, went unexplained. I thought that was a missed opportunity, as was this issue of Ukraine and China. You know, foreign policy seemed sort of shoved in the back, and he didn't have a lot of asks for Congress. And I can only imagine that's because he was, you know, wanted to focus, to Peggy's point, on the economy, and he did that a lot. But also because I think, you know, he has spent a lot on Ukraine. He has asked for a lot of money, and Republicans are pushing back on that. So those two things really surprised me. And the other thing I have to say is, in a context of talking about spending, here was somebody talking about, and I wrote some of them down, universal pre-K, free community college, higher salaries for public school teachers, expanded tax credits. The list goes on and on. So if they're thinking about a serious conversation about spending cuts, you've got to know that where he stands is completely and diametrically opposed to what these Republicans are talking about, which leads me to say to your question that I think we're going to be June, July. I think the Bloomberg reporters covering Congress are not going to get a vacation. This debt ceiling fight is going to go to the wire. And I don't see how they come together if that's where they're starting out without moving awfully far to the center.
Peggy, as you cover this down here in Washington, is that the number one issue in terms of economic policy right now pending in Washington? Because a lot of things we heard tonight, I don't think are going to see the light of day. I could be wrong, but given we have a divided Congress, I'm not sure we're ever going to see it. Is that the number one issue? Besides, of course, inflation, but sort of the president's delegated that, as it were, to Jay Powell over at the Fed.
I think it's the most clear issue that they will have to come to some type of agreement on, or basically drive us off a cliff, which will be potentially bad for American households, and markets will go crazy. You know, it'll be very volatile. I think, though, there are other issues, and there are some issues where they may come together on some bipartisan way. Biden talked a lot tonight about big tech, antitrust, privacy when it comes to technology, when it comes to kids. So I think those are some issues that we could see some bipartisan agreement around and more activity around. I also noted that they talked a little bit about the payment system again, credit cards again. That's something we saw a lot on right after the financial crisis, not so much lately. That issue also seems to be creeping back up. And the middle class. We've done a lot of reporting at Bloomberg, especially towards the end of last year, about how the middle class really benefited from the era of low interest rates. Lots of people refinanced, lots of people bought homes, and that's changing. And I think they're aware inside the Biden administration that we could be going into a time period where the middle class starts to struggle just as we enter the 2024 race.
What about this Junk Fee Act? Is that what we called it? I think it's an act. Now, did you know about this? I'd never heard about the Junk Fee Act.
Right.
And it has something to do with resort fees and how much you pay for tickets to them. And I must say, this is a whole new world I didn't know about.
Yeah, so I think I have more to learn on that too, David, but my ears did perk up because I do think there are maybe more to come around payments and credit cards. You know, we have a lot of different ways that people can pay for things now. Venmo, Zelle, a lot of different things that some people are looking at and saying, hey, do we have enough consumer protection here? That's one thing to keep in mind about the Biden administration. It's a common theme for them, consumer protection that runs through antitrust, big tech, big banks, credit cards, things like that.
So actually, to report now to people who are listening rather than watching, we do have President Biden out of the chamber at long last. He's made his way out. He's presumably on his way back to the White House because he does have a trip first thing tomorrow morning out to Madison to try to tout some of what he's doing on infrastructure. But I want to come back to something you have talked about before, Jeannie. And when you look at a speech like this, as you said, I kept the list here. I've got a long list of different things that are not necessarily related one to the other. So when Rick says it's a question of what do the American people take away from this, what do they take away? Is on the one hand, it's a hodgepodge, it's so much stuff, or is there something in there for just about everybody? And so people didn't hear anything else, but they heard the one thing they care about, maybe it's junk fees for all I know, but something that they really care about.
Yeah, you know, I agree. It was something of a laundry list. I wish it had been less, but one thing I think people are going to take away from it, particularly a group that he was speaking to tonight, which were Democrats who we've talked an awful lot about, who are uncertain whether they think Joe Biden should run again. I think he was showing that I have the energy and the strength, and I quite enjoy rubbing with elbows with the Republicans and taking them on. And I think that's one thing people are going to take away from this speech, which leads me to say that I see this speech really as a soft launch to 2024. This is, you know, for those of us who listen to Joe Biden a lot, you could almost repeat these phrases. You know, he uses them over and over again. He's incredibly consistent in that regard. And I think we saw here that he is going to use the same playbook in 24 if he decides to run that he used in 20 and really used in 2022, which is to cast the extremism in the Republican Party and say, I am a steady hand and I'm not afraid to take them on. So, you know, that'll work provided Trump runs. I don't know how well it works if Trump doesn't run or is not the nominee. He's already running. So I see the speech that way. I think that's one takeaway. Otherwise, you're looking at a laundry list that I'm not sure resonates in the way he might have wanted it to.
Rick, as you know, those of us in the media are always reading tea leaves, whether they're there or not. Help us read tea leaves. Did you see anything in this speech that would indicate one way or the other whether you think President Biden has made a decision about running?
Not in this speech, and I kind of disagree with Jeannie on this. I really didn't see this speech at all as a message to be president for another 4 years. I mean, I barely saw this speech as to why you're even hanging around for the next 2 years, because it was basically a recitation of everything he's already accomplished, patting on the back, saying, hey, we've done so much, now we just have to, like, mop it up, you know, make sure things get done, and that's when the American people will start to see this stuff. You know, we're going to get rid of lead pipes. Well, that's a 10-year project. I mean, like, I don't know if he's actually expecting to be around for another 10 years when that's completed. But the reality is there's no vision for the future. He did not actually even lay out a plan for the next 2 years. And so I was scratching my head, kept waiting for him. Any minute now, he's going to say, for the next 2 years, here's what we're going to accomplish. Or for the next 6 years, this is what the job well done will be. And you didn't see that. It's kind of a lobbyist paradise, this speech. I mean, every little issue that the lobbyists want in Washington, he talked about. I mean, some I didn't even know were issues. And he brought them up in the State of the Union. And so you really wonder, like, who's he talking to there? Your point is, you know, is he talking to every man, woman, and child in the United States and, like, did a poll and ticked off the top 25 issues and, oh, one of them going to connect? That's not how this usually works. No big ideas. Nothing, as Jeannie said, on Commander-in-Chief. Big portions of his presidency were left out tonight. And so I don't get the sense that there's this, like, plan for the campaign coming up, and here are the themes that I'm testing out in my State of the Union to the 40 million people who are watching tonight. I just think it's a missed opportunity.
Okay, let me turn it around. Maybe a lobbyist's dream list. Is it a Jeff Zients chief of staff dream list? I mean, if you're the chief of staff, the new chief...
Being a mom,
oh, I'm sorry. We now have Sarah Huckabee Sanders. We're doing her now live.
I believe every story I hear. So forgive me for not believing much of anything I heard tonight from President Biden. From out-of-control inflation and violent crime to the dangerous border crisis and threat from China. Biden and the Democrats have failed you. They know it, and you know it. And it's time for a change. Tonight, let us reaffirm our commitment to a timeless American idea that government exists not to rule the people, but to serve the people. Democrats want to rule us with more government control, but that's not who we are. America is the greatest country the world has ever known because we're the freest country the world has ever known, with a people who are strong and resilient. 5 months ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. It was a hard time for our family, particularly our kids, Scarlett, Huck, and George. But we kept our faith and persevered. Thanks to exceptional doctors here in Arkansas, a successful surgery, and the grace of God, I am cancer-free. Through it all, I couldn't help but think about my mom. She was 20 years old and in her first year of marriage when she was diagnosed with spinal cancer. The doctors told her she might not live, and if she did live, they said she'd never walk again. And if she did walk, she'd definitely never have children. The daughter she was told she'd never have was just sworn in as the new governor of Arkansas and is speaking to you tonight. Adversity and fear of the unknown can paralyze us, but faith propels us to charge boldly ahead. We can't stand still in the face of great challenges. You and I were put on this earth for such a time as this, to charge boldly ahead. I'll be the first to admit, President Biden and I don't have a lot in common. I'm for freedom, he's for government control. At 40, I'm the youngest governor in the country. And at 80, he's the oldest president in American history. I'm the first woman to lead my state, and he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. Whether Joe Biden believes this madness or is simply too weak to resist it, his administration has been completely hijacked by the radical left. The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy. It's time for a new generation of Republican leadership. Upon taking office just a few weeks ago, I signed executive orders to ban CRT, racism, and indoctrination in our schools, eliminate the use of derogatory term Latinx in our government, repealed COVID orders, and said never again to authoritarian mandates and shutdowns. Americans want common sense from their leaders, but in Washington, the Biden administration is doubling down on crazy. President Biden inherited the fastest economic recovery on record, the most secure border in history, cheap, abundant, homegrown energy, fast rising wages, a rebuilt military, and a world that was stable and at peace. But over the last 2 years, Democrats destroyed it all. Despite Democrats' trillions in reckless spending and mountains of debt, we now have the worst border crisis in American history. As a mom, my heart breaks for every parent who has lost a son or daughter to addiction. 100,000 Americans a year are now killed from drug overdoses, largely from fentanyl pouring across our southern border. Yet the Biden administration refuses to secure the border and save American lives. And after years of Democrat attacks on law enforcement and calls to defund the police, violent criminals roam free, while law-abiding families live in fear. Beyond our border, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, from North Korea to Iran, President Biden's weakness puts our nation and the world at risk. And the president's refusal to stand up to China, our most formidable adversary, is dangerous and unacceptable. President Biden is unwilling to defend our border, defend our skies, and defend our people. He is simply unfit to serve as commander-in-chief. And while you reap the consequences of their failures, the Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace. But we are under attack in a left-wing culture war we didn't start and never wanted to fight. Every day we are told we must partake in their rituals, salute their flags, and worship their false idols, all while big government colludes with big tech to strip away the most American thing there is, your freedom of speech. That's not normal. It's crazy, and it's wrong. Make no mistake, Republicans will not surrender this fight. We will lead with courage and do what's right, not what's politically correct or convenient. Republicans believe in an America where strong families thrive in safe communities, where jobs are abundant and paychecks are rising, where the freedom our veterans shed their blood to defend is the birthright of every man, woman, and child. These are the principles Republican governors are fighting for, and in Washington, under the leadership of Senate Republicans and Speaker Kevin McCarthy, we will hold the Biden administration accountable. Down the street from where I sit is my alma mater, Little Rock Central High. As a student there, I will never forget watching my dad, Governor Mike Huckabee, and President Bill Clinton hold the doors open to the Little Rock Nine. Doors that 40 years earlier had been closed to them because they were black. Today, those children once barred from the schoolhouse are now heroes memorialized in bronze at our State House. I'm proud of the progress our country has made, and I believe giving every child access to a quality education, regardless of their race or income, is the civil rights issue of our day. Tomorrow, I will unveil an education package that will be the most far-reaching, bold, conservative education reform in the country. My plan empowers parents with real choices, improves literacy and career readiness, and helps put a good teacher in every classroom by increasing their starting salary from one of the lowest to one of the highest in the nation. Here in Arkansas and across America, Republicans are working to end the policy of trapping kids in failing schools and sentencing them to a lifetime of poverty. We will educate, not indoctrinate our kids, and put students on a path to success. It's time for a new generation to lead. This is our moment. This is our opportunity. A new generation born in the waning decades of the last century, shaped by economic booms and stock market busts, forged by the triumph of the Cold War and the tragedy of 9/11. A generation brimming with passion and new ideas to solve age-old problems. A generation moored to our deepest values and oldest traditions, yet unafraid to challenge the present order and find a better way forward. If we seize this moment together, America can once again be the land of the free and the home of the brave. During my 2.5 years at the White House, I traveled on every foreign trip with the president. A trip I will never forget was on December 25th of 2018. My husband Brian and I had just cleaned up wrapping paper that was shoved into every corner of our house, thanks to our 3 kids, when I had to walk out on my own family's Christmas, unable to tell them where I was going that night, because the place I'd be traveling was so dangerous, they didn't want anybody to know that the president was going to be on the ground, even for a few hours. We boarded Air Force One in complete and total darkness. There were no lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. Our phones and computers shut down and turned in. we were going completely off the grid. Nearly 12 hours later, in the pitch black of night, we landed in the war-torn part of western Iraq. It was again a similar scene. No lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. The only thing you could see was coming from about a mile away in a dining hall where hundreds of troops who were in the fight against ISIS had gathered expecting to celebrate Christmas with senior military leadership from around the region. They had absolutely no idea that the President and First Lady were about to walk into that room. And when they did, it was a sight and a scene and a sound I hope I never forget. The room erupted. Men and women from every race, religion, and region, every political party, every demographic you can imagine, started chanting in perfect unison over and over and over again, USA, USA, USA. It was an absolutely perfect picture of what makes our country great. One of the young soldiers yelled from the back, "Mr. President, I re-enlisted in the military because of you." And the president said, "And son, I'm here because of you." Shortly after, that young soldier came up to me. He said, "Sarah, you have a tough job." I told him, "What I do is nothing. You take bombs and bullets. That's a tough job." And in a moment that I know I'll cherish for the rest of my life, that soldier reached up and he pulled the Brave Rifles patch he wore on his shoulder, and he placed it into my hand, a sign of ultimate respect. And he said, "Sarah, we are in this together." Overwhelmed with emotion and speechless, I just hugged him with tears in my eyes and a grateful heart for our heroes who keep us free. That young man and everyone who has served before him, all of those who serve alongside him, and the thousands we know who will be called upon to serve after him, deserve to know they have a country and a community back home doing our part in the fight for freedom. America is great because we are free. But today, our freedom is under attack, and the America we love is in danger. President Biden and the Democrats have failed you, and it's time for a change. A new generation of Republican leaders are stepping up, not to be caretakers of the status quo, but to be change makers for the American people. We know not what the future holds, but we know who holds the future in his hands. And with God as our witness, we will show the world that America is still the place where freedom reigns and liberty will never die. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
We've been listening to and watching the governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, in a response to the State of the Union address from Joe Biden, the President of the United States. And I haven't done a word bubble, but I think probably the word I heard more often than any other was attack. She said that, in fact, we are under attack in a left-wing culture war, that they did not choose the Republicans, but that they will not surrender. She said that President Biden inherited the fastest growing economic recovery ever, the secure border, cheap energy, a rebuilt military, and destroyed it all, wasting trillions of dollars. She said in the end it was a question of a choice between normal and crazy. She did refer to her own battle with cancer, as her mother had battled cancer, and also some about education. But mainly, it had a very military tone to the whole speech, at least as I heard it. But let's talk to some others about what they heard. Rick, what was this speech?
This was a campaign speech. Unlike President Biden, who really didn't give us much of a campaign speech, this was all about fighting the Democrats. Time for a change, right? We got to get them out. You got to get us back in, and our policies will be inherently better. And she didn't talk much about policy other than her own policy on education in the state of Arkansas that she's about to unveil. But the reality is that the darkness of the tone of the speech, as you point out, some pretty hot language in it, was subduing, I think, especially after the speech we just heard from inside the House chamber. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But this was definitely a, game on, 2024. We're ready to go to fight with the Democrats. There was no effort toward comedy, unity, bipartisanship whatsoever in this speech. And I think that's probably what you're going to see. She did say something at the end where she said, but this is all about a new generation of Republican leadership. Kind of turned the page on, Donald Trump, who, even though she mentioned she's the youngest governor and Joe Biden's the oldest president, she didn't talk much about how old Donald Trump is and where he stands in that, but he's definitely not the new generation.
So, Jeannie, a fight without a doubt, but I didn't hear a lot of fight about policy. It sounded like a fight about culture. It was almost all, at least what I heard, apart from the reference to education that she's going to do in Arkansas, it sounded it was all about what she calls the culture wars.
That's right. And, to me, this was a base play, and it's something that Democrats will welcome. This is somebody who came into the governorship, and what did she do? She banned critical race theory. She banned the use of the term Latinx. She has talked about repealing COVID measures. It is all a play for the base, and this is something that Democrats would welcome in 2024. She has an awfully compelling story. She's the youngest governor, the first female governor of Arkansas. She has had a terrible health issue recently, but the speech itself is something that Democrats will welcome. It's a hard speech to give, but it sets up for them, as she talks about it, this sort of crazy versus normal. That's exactly what Joe Biden says, and the shoe is on the other foot. So it's stunning to hear it reversed. And, I think they are both campaign speeches the way I hear them.
Fascinating. So, Peggy, let me come to you, because I think of you as really focused on economics and the economy and economic regulation in Washington. I'm not sure there's a lot to engage with for people who are concerned about the economy or business in what Sarah Huckabee Sanders had to say, other than perhaps, again, the education aspect.
Well, yes, it was specific, as Rick said, on education. I will say on the recovery being destroyed, I think there's some data that we've covered at Bloomberg that would put that into question. I mean, just on Friday, we saw a jobs report that was blockbuster in terms of 517,000 jobs created in January, unemployment at 3.4%. So I don't know how you fight that economic policy that's going on right now, although we do have a tough road ahead. The one other thing I will say is she opened with border policy. That is something that, Republicans are hitting hard, but also that the Biden administration doesn't have a clear policy answer to either.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We'll have to come back to border at some point, Rick. We're going to have to deal with immigration.
Look, I mean, I think that was the low point of the Biden speech tonight. It got the worst reaction. He got off script. He didn't really deliver what I would call a comprehensive border policy. And he's not connecting the massive fentanyl increase in deaths in America to the fact that most, if not all, that fentanyl is coming across our southern border. He would be well advised to take a look and figure out how drug policy intersects with border policy and start to talk intelligently about what his administration's doing in that regard.
Yeah, so briefly, something we should cover a little more, because actually the data show the vast majority does not come with illegal immigrants. It comes through legal immigration, people smuggling it.
That's right. That's right. And the president needs to make that case clearly, and it's definitely something that's got to be discussed more.
Getting lost, no question about it. Thank you so much. It's really been a great evening with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, and also Peggy Collins, covering the State of the Union address from President Joe Biden and then the response from Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And that does it for our coverage of the State of the Union address on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Coming up next, global coverage of the markets. This is Bloomberg.